I would like to talk in this video about the notion of freedom in the United States and what I believe freedom means um, in U.S. politics and um, w- why it's important for us to understand this concept for approaching certain situations and uh, conflicts that we have uh, in our daily lives today. Um, Freedom is obviously a hugely important word in U.S. culture, um, and I don't think that we have a very clear idea of what the founding fathers meant by freedom or even what we mean by freedom. We tend to think that freedom is some sort of ultimate freedom of the individual, but that's absurdly false, like incorrect. The ultimate freedom of the individual would be, I think, historically, what we see. One of the expressions of that extremity of personal freedom is actually the North American Indian cultures that were destroyed by the Europeans. Um, those cultures had an extreme amount of individual freedom. The individual and was an extreme form of meritocracy. The individual had freedom to kill, steal property, destroy um, what they wanted, and there was no sort of recourse for in many of the cultures. Now, I can't paint with a broad sword about all of the different American Indian groups. I'm most familiar with the Cherokee because this is sort of my family's background. I'm familiar with a few of the other groups. I have some family who are Kiowa, but um, there was a lot of variation, and over time there was a lot of variation. So the mound builders, uh, which were sort of up and down the Mississippi River area, had some form of coherence that allowed them to build massive cities. I mean, we talk about one city that was like 100,000 people at one time, all gone by the time the Europeans arrived, which we don't have an adequate explanation for. But we also don't know what sort of restrictions were on the individual in such societies. But by and large, let's say that you had a personal conflict with another individual, and especially if they were from another group. And I don't want to use the word tribes, although this is a word that's used by my family. They also use the word native, um, who are American Indians, and so I'm not trying to be not politically correct, but um, or I'm not trying to adhere to some sort of idea of political correctness. So maybe I'll just say tribes. Uh, but if it if an individual from sort of one Cherokee group had a conflict with, let's say, another Cherokee group, and captured that individual, then they could kill them, they could torture them, they could take their property, and there was no recourse for for the victim of that situation. And this was uh, then, as I conceive of it, extreme individual freedom. Obviously, we don't have anything like that in the United States. So I feel like that notion of freedom needs to be let go of. And I'm not saying that because I adhere to some sort of a the individual has a responsibility to society philosophy. That's not where I'm going with this. There is a balance between individual freedom and social responsibility. I do believe that, but that's not where this video is going. Rather, I want to talk about the significance of one simple, very banal form of freedom that once I say it, you can be like, yeah, sure, whatever. But I feel like there are a lot more layers to it than we popularly conceive of it, and it's also the source of so much tension in our culture now. And then the third reason that I want to discuss this is because it seems that a there have been historical periods where this is needed, where the U.S. population is needed to be reminded of this freedom in certain ways. And I'll give you one example. So the freedom that I'm talking about is this: simply freedom from the tyranny of the minority. And that tyranny of the minority can be anything from sort of the reign of terror in the French Revolution, where a certain small group is uh, killing the aristocrats, but it can be freedom from the aristocrats. And that's what the founding fathers were fighting against, was an inherited power structure, a minority that was an inherited group, and but it also can be freedom from the tyranny of sort of a communistic sort of Soviet uh, setup political structure, where there's a small oligarchy that's deciding or enforcing the rules of politics and culture and education for the entire society. In and the nuances of the the current situation with Trump are significant to me. They're not lost on me here. I just don't want to treat them at the moment. But I will hopefully. I do intend to swing back around and discuss maybe not treat the abortion issue head on. We'll see. But let's approach this from a different angle, which is, what is the strength of the tyranny of the majority, which is what our republic is based on. And of course, the tyranny of the majority is seen as a malevolent force by I don't know, I can't say most of academia, but by quite a strong voice in academia. And it's trickled out popularly into some sort of popular notion of sort of social democracy. And I do believe that social democracy, as practiced in Australia, the continent of Europe, the UK, I know less about, but sort of this allows for a greater tyranny of the minority than we have in the United States, because they have formal control structures like, well, in the UK, the NIH, the National Institute of Health. In Australia, the government can dictate, because of because because there is a national health system that has to be protected. The government felt that it had the right to dictate when, during COVID, for example, when people were allowed to go outside. And so I have dear friends in Australia whose children were 14, 15, 16 at the time. And for 2 years, I mean, really 2 years, they were stuck inside in this time where social development is so remarkably important to the human psyche. The Australian government, a tyranny of the minority, felt that they were in the right to force people inside. Now, um, there are some arguments about why maybe that's not the tyranny of the minority. Maybe the majority of Australians supported that. If they didn't support that, there were structures in place for them to change their government. I don't know. I only know that social democracy system that that seems to be so appealing to many Americans, especially college trained Americans, and I'm avoiding the word brainwashed, but college trained Americans seems very attractive to them, has significant tyranny of the minority issues. Now, we have tyranny of the majority issues as well. And of course, the most dominant one has been segregation. So once slavery ended, and at the end of Reconstruction, the majority of Americans felt that they had the right to suppress the rights of Black Americans. And in the early 20th century, I was reading, this is the example that I want to give. I was reading a biography of Theodore Roosevelt a few years ago, before I got COVID. I can't read anymore, but before I got COVID, and the author of that biography was talking about one of the senators. I believe he was the Senate Majority Leader. He was an older gentleman, 60, 70 years old. But the writer of the biography repeated a number of times in the narrative that this guy's, one of his constant motifs in his public discourse is democracy is the will of the majority. And we think that like segregation was a settled issue. No, it wasn't. They were fighting about segregation 100 years ago at the beginning of the 20th century. Americans weren't on board with that completely, and there was a lot of progressive discourse about ending segregation. There were really strong opinions about ending segregation, but the majority kept electing segregationists into office. The majority continued. The majority of those leaders continued to support segregation, and this guy, the majority leader at the time, he kept reminding people that democracy is the will of the majority. It's a majority wins political system, and this extreme sort of situation is tragic, and we're lucky that the majority of the United States chose to end segregation and to provide for the rights of minorities, and we're still in that struggle, and we're still in that movement. But the same can be said about the majority of men in the United States, who were the only ones who were allowed to vote until they gave women the right to vote. So the majority of men decided that it was better for, or more right, or whatever reasons they had. They elected representatives, and those representatives voted to give women the right to participate in government. So the tyranny of the majority is has not always been tyrannical, is probably my first point. And sorry, I got a long time to get there, but it's an important point, which is to say that I feel like uh, a lot of the left today would be very comfortable seeing a government put in place that would um, ensure equality for all and eradicate the will of the majority. And I feel like that there are a lot of ways that such things could be implemented, but one of the ways, let's discuss this. One of the ways that it's being implemented is in California with DEI in Hollywood. Now, I want to make another video about the marriage between capitalism and republicanism, and I say that because we don't have a democracy in the United States. We have a republic, and um, the reasons why I support capitalism, but and I'm going to use this example in that video as well. But briefly, the state of California is giving tax rebates to movie makers and I assume sort of TV show makers, like these streaming TV shows. If they're going to make it in California, then they can get tax breaks, which are offered in other places, like famously Georgia. That's why so many Marvel movies are being made in Georgia. This is not a new sort of idea, but what California is doing is setting strict regulations about it only if you meet certain diversity criteria. And the problem with this is that what is that it strips the agency of the public away from supporting its media. So what we've seen for the last 5 years, I'm a very, very harsh critic of what I call New Hollywood, and New Hollywood is a term that's applied to the directors and producers of the 1970s. But to me, this is we're in a new era, particularly since the Black Lives Matter movement, where media makers want to include particularly female directors and minority representation in the media, and largely exclude a lot of the old filmmakers, be they writers, be they producers, be they directors, and not showcase the demographics that were, particularly white males. So it's the decentering of the industry from the white male. The problem is that the white males in that industry were the ones who knew how to write, were the ones who knew how to direct, particularly action flicks. So Disney has famously hired sort of female directors to direct particularly their TV shows, Star Wars TV shows, for example. Mandalorian Season 3 is a really good example of this, of female directors who are hired to do these action TV shows, and they don't know how to put together an action scene, and they're ridiculously bad. And when this first started, I was on board with, okay, look, let's give them a try. Like they have to learn somewhere. But now we're 5-6 years into this project, and the projects just keep getting remaining at the same level of poorly written, poorly conceived, and poorly executed. And the public has largely turned their back on it. Disney is losing money hand over fist uh, with the intellectual property that it purchased, um, Lucasfilms and Star Wars and the MCU. It's produced flop after flop after flop of this. The public has rejected it, and yet, if Disney will go back to California and start making these really bad productions in California, California would give them a tax rebate for it, therefore undercutting the rule of the majority by a tyranny of the minority. This would be the next step would be for Disney or the U.S. government to bail, for California or the U.S. government to bail Disney out. That would be the ultimate uh, middle finger to the majority of Americans. For a government, be it the state of California or a progressive U.S. government, if Disney got so bad, if they were failing so bad that the U.S. government said, "Hey, we're going to bail you out because we feel like your progressive politics and progressive videos are important enough that we're gonna fund it for the public good." Screw the public good. The public good is uh, if it's a small minority that is telling the public what its good is, then there's no way to correct that except to the destroy the structure that's maintaining that. And that's what the U.S. Revolution was the aristocracy, the crown of England was dictating what the public good was. A small minority was dictating what the public good was for the majority. And the founding fathers said, yeah, no, not anymore. We're done with that. The majority is going to dictate for itself what the public good is. And yeah, they may make some mistakes. They may have slavery. They may have segregation. But we have to believe that the process of democracy and the process of capitalism, and these two have to be married in order for this to work. These have to be married in order for this to work. This process will correct itself, and that the majority will see in time what needs to be corrected. And because the majority will see what needs to be corrected, it doesn't have to tear down. If there's a structure in place that is based on the will of the majority, then the majority can easily change it. And that's our system of government. So it's our system of government so long as government stays out of it. And let's go back to the abortion issue. I am not wanting to deal with this issue very strongly, but the notion that a small minority of individuals, 9 individuals in the Supreme Court, can review the facts, the science, and the morality, and make a decision for the majority is just anti-democratic. It's just anti-democratic. And I'm not arguing pro-life or pro-abortion. I'm just arguing against the Supreme Court deciding this factor. It's anti-democratic. And if you want to have rights, then the majority will have to legislate those rights. And the same could be applied to gay rights. Right now, the only thing that is providing for sort of gay rights in the United States is a Supreme Court decision that needs to be legislated. those rights need to be legislated the same as equal racial rights had to be legislated, because that is the process. And that is the expression of the will of the majority. So I've been talking about this for about 25 minutes. I'm not sure that I've been convincing, but the will of the majority, which many people are going to call the tyranny of the majority, is the freedom of the United States. That's it. That's it. There are like no other ways to encapsulate freedom that we have in the United States. Not freedom of the individual, not freedom to choose, not freedom to pursue happiness. I mean, these things are important, but the essential freedom is the freedom of the will of the majority to express itself and to be the final authority on public political, the word I'm looking for is, political decisions, and standards, and everything down to the judicial, everything from national policy, foreign policy, all the way down to the will of the majority being represented by the jury. And that's the next video that I want to make, is the tyranny of the legislative as it's practiced today, and why one specific element of our judicial process, I believe, is undercutting our tyranny of the majority, or will of the majority, democracy, republic. I'll stop here. That's long enough. Thanks for listening. I hope you got something out of it, and hope you have a great day.